ever served in the military? That's great. All right. I want to ask some military questions. So for the military people, make answers. How many people entered the military involuntarily? Was anybody here drafted to the military? Okay, no one was drafted. So everybody who was in the military went in voluntarily, correct? All right. When you were in the military, did you have opportunities to get out of the military? I mean, you signed up for a few years at a time, right? Is anyone here who was career military here? All right. So we have a couple. So Ron, you could have opted out at certain points along the way?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And Tom, you could have as well? How many years did you serve?
21.
How many years did you serve? 22. That's your beat. We just had a young man who's not here today. He's probably out celebrating his retirement. Mark Edquid, who just retired from the military after 22 and a half years. So Friday night. So he gets the prize here. Now, to the soldiers. What happens if someone doesn't follow an order in the military? What happens? What?
You can get court-martialed, the brig.
Okay, you can get court-martialed, you can get thrown in the brig, you can just get thrown out. All right. What happens to the military unit when someone doesn't follow orders? Disaster? All right. Is your armed force, we'll just say army, I don't know who served in what branch, but is the army stronger or weaker when everyone follows orders? Is it stronger, or when people are disobeying orders? It's evident. Is it evident? Is that really evident? I mean, there are certain things that seem self-evident that they're not self-evident anymore. But yes, I will stipulate, I will go with that the military is much stronger when everyone's in line following orders. Now, what if a few people are deserters? They just leave the army. Does that really affect the army? Can you still leave with a few people who get out? You can leave if a few people walk away, right?
It erodes morale.
It erodes morale. Would you rather someone walk away or stay in and disobey orders? What? Would you rather them leave or stay and disobey orders? If they're going to leave, if they're going to not follow orders, would you rather them just get out, or would you rather them stay and not behave?
Better for them to stay and get court-martialed so everybody else knows what happens.
Oh, that's a good answer. Better for them to stay and get court-martialed so everyone knows what happens. All right, good. Better for them to stay and try to be corrected than for them to leave. All right. Now, last question for the military. What did you do when you got an order you didn't want to follow? All right, did you have to follow orders you didn't want to follow? Did you have to follow orders you didn't want to follow at some point? Sometimes? All right, some orders you didn't agree with, you just follow them anyway, right? Because that's what's expected in the military. All right, now, we all joined the army of God when we got baptized. We all did. In fact, I have a baptism this afternoon, and if you're not doing anything at 1:30, you want to come and pray for the young man that's being baptized, you'll hear in the baptism service a lot of military overtones about put on the armor of God and the breastplate of righteousness and the sword of the truth. There's a lot of military overtones in the baptism and in other services in our church. And everybody who comes into the baptism, I guess you could say if you're a baby, you don't join by choice. But we're all here by choice. No one drafted you today and came to your house and collected you and said, you must come here to worship today, right? Everyone participated in God's army by choice today. And everyone stays in the army here by choice. Now, when you join God's army, like if you join the U.S. Army, you're coming under some kind of authority. And if you're under authority, there are two things that are expected. Obedience, you listen to the authority, and submission. And obedience is when you listen to authority. Submission is when you don't want to obey the authority, but you obey it anyway. Because that's what's expected. It's actually harder to be submissive than it is to be obedient. All right? But that's what's expected when you join the army of God, that you're going to obey the commandments. And if you don't quite agree with the commandments just like in the military, if you don't quite agree with yours, you're going to submit to them because that's the way that the army goes better. If everyone's kind of doing their own thing, then the army's not cohesive, then the army can't really do anything if everyone's doing their own thing. That's why in an army there's a hierarchical structure, and you have rules and regulations that kind of govern everything so that everybody gets on the same page and the army moves in the same way, and it wins. Now, people in the United States of America have a problem with the word submission. They see that as an awful thing, to submit to the will of somebody else. At least that's what we say. We don't want to, like, I am my own man. I don't want to submit to anybody. Except that that's actually not true, because I submit to the will of many people. I submit to the will of my doctor. When I go and I'm sick, and I say to the doctor, "Doctor, what do I do in order to get better?" The doctor says, "Do A, B, and C." And I say, "Well, okay, I guess I want to get better, so I better do A, B, and C." If I'm not planning on submitting to the will of the doctor, then why am I going to waste my time going there? Right? And we submit to the will of the people who have built our roads. I don't know anything about engineering. I don't know if these bridges are safe to drive on, and yet I drive on them. I submit to the will of the person who built the roads. I submit to the will of the person who installed the electricity and the plumbing in my house. Again, I don't know anything about these things. So I just trust that they're going to do that. Actually, I blew out a breaker yesterday, and then I tried to do all the wrong things, and then I finally went to my neighbor, who's not an electrician, but he tinkers with things. And I said, can you come over here and see what's going on in my house? Because now I don't have an air conditioner. And he came in, and I let him in the house, I let him diddle around with my electric panel, and then he fixed the problem. I had to submit to what his will was. He said, "You need a new one of these." So I said, "Would you please go buy me one?" Which he was so gracious and did that for me. And he felt sorry for me because I was mowing the lawn, I was all sweaty, and I wasn't really in a position to go buy anything. But again, we submit to the will of other people. So this idea of like submission as being a bad thing or an impossible thing, that's just not true, because we submit to people all the time. Now, the American style of thinking is we submit to no one. I am my own man. I am the center of my own universe. And this is why there are many institutions in our country that are crumbling. All right? One of them is the institution of marriage. Because there are people who are like, I can't submit to the will of another person. That's why half of the marriages end up in divorce. Right? Because people have a hard time submitting to other people. And half the marriages that last, they're not happy anyway. Because again, people are so focused on being their own person that they're not interested in submitting to the relationship for the good of the relationship. This is also why friendships are weak. We come into friendship, and instead of holding on to a friend for life, as soon as we get into the first skirmish with a friend, we kind of walk away from that. We may at times walk away from that, feeling like I can't submit to what the other one needs. And that's also why values are weak. Because we don't know we don't know when to stand up for a value, and we don't know when to submit our idea, our independent idea, for the values that the whole holds. Now, true freedom is found in submission to God. True freedom is found in submission to God. There is no freedom without God. Now, if you say, like, how can that be, Father? If you want to know why that's so, go to any hospital or hospice where someone's about to die and ask them, if they are not Christian, how they feel. And they will say that they feel scared, or they feel lost, or they feel sad, because they don't have God, and they know that they're at their end. But you go to somebody who believes in God, even in the most dire circumstance, and what would be more dire than being about to take your last breath, and you say to them, how do you feel? And they say, I feel free, because now I'm free to take my last breath, trusting and believing that I'm going to a better place. So when you ultimately get down to it, and my freedom to buy a car, and my freedom to have a job, and my freedom to spend money, and my freedom to own a home, and my freedom to come and go as I want, when all those freedoms are gone, because I'm sick and at the end of my life, I will still feel free, because I have the Lord. Now let me ask you a rhetorical question. What happens when you have an idea that goes against God's law? God says, don't do this. This is not right. And you have a mind that says, I'm Father Stavros, a 43-year-old independent American, and I don't agree with God with what you're saying. What do you do in that case? pray, okay. I mean, but ultimately you got to make a choice. I'm going with God's law or I'm going with my own thought. You got to go with God's law, right? Because if you don't go with God's law, then you will put yourself ahead of God. And then you are not free. So there are times when God's law says something like, don't do this. And everybody says, do this. And you have to say, you know what? I have to submit to the law of God. Like, for instance, the law of God says, don't steal. Don't take something that's not yours. All right? And no matter how we may redefine stealing, borrowing, on credit, whatever, we've really done well at redefining law. All right? Taking something that's not yours is not right, and it's never going to be right. But let's say that we here at St. John's, we come up with some great new way of doing things, where in our way of doing things, stealing is okay. And we all agree. And we all agree, let's have like a really closed community where we all agree that stealing is okay. We're not going to steal from anybody else, we're just going to steal from each other. And we're going to say that's okay. No one has to know outside our building. When we're in our little building, we're just going to steal from each other and say that's okay. Our Society of St. John says it's okay. Is it okay? What if we all agree that it's okay? Again, it doesn't affect anybody outside the church, just our little closed community. We say, it's okay to steal. Is it okay? Okay, it's not okay, because God's law says you shouldn't take something from somebody else that's not yours. All right? And so it doesn't matter if we all think that's a bad idea. If we are in God's army, if we are Christians, then we have to submit to the will of God and say, I'm not going to do that even though I may want to do that. Which law has the highest value? God's law, man's law, or your own version of the law? Anybody think your own version of the law is higher than everybody else's? Anybody, please, I'd like to know that. All right. Who thinks that man's version of the law is the highest thing out there? Anybody? So we all agree that God's law is the highest thing out there. Now, what do you think about the idea of rewriting God's law? Let's say God has a law and we're like, you know, I just don't like that law. Let's all get together and we'll just have a big convention here, big parish assembly meeting, and we'll just sort of rewrite the law to make it fit us. And then we'll call it God's law. What do y'all think of that? Is that problematic or is that okay? We're just all going to agree that God's law is out the window. All right, again, it's problematic. I mean, who are we to sit in a convention and rewrite the law? And then to think that we are correct about it. Now, who has the authority to change God's law? Do I have the authority to do that? How about the president? How about the Congress? How about the Supreme Court? How about the whole population of the United States? Nobody. Only God can change God's law. And since God's law hasn't changed, I'm not sure why we're constantly trying to rewrite it. See, the centurion was a strong personality. The centurion was in charge of 100 people. 100 people obediently answered to him without question. Because when people disobey orders, as they say in A Few Good Men, when people disobey orders, then people die. Right? Anyone see that movie? Jack Nicholson does that so famously. No one disobeys orders, and people die. Right? So here's the centurion who's got 100 people that are obeying everything he says. And he does the equivalent of, he doesn't go talk to the enemy army, but he goes and talks to someone in the enemy nation, Jesus, a Jew. And he looks at him and he says, you know, I may be a centurion, but I recognize you as the Lord. You have the ability to heal my servant. That's why Jesus says your faith is so extraordinary. Because you're not only submitting to the will of another person, you who is like the supreme being there, the centurion, but you're submitting to someone you don't even agree with. Right? And this is what we have to do. You might be the head of your household. You might be the head of a corporation. You might be rich and famous. You might have a lot of people who submit to you. But ultimately, we have to submit to God, whether we agree with him or not. Because this is what it means to be in God's army. This is what it means to be a servant of God. This is what it means to be a soldier. These things, they're missing in the world today. Because we've made ourselves gods. And that's a large reason why the world is hurting so much today. We have authority. Everybody here has some kind of authority. Unless you're like 2 years old. Then you will have authority one day. But you have authority as a parent, as a homeowner, as a business owner. But no matter how much authority you have, we are under authority. And it's by God's word and that alone that we are healed and that we're ultimately saved. I'm very happy that I'm a soldier in God's army. I'm very happy that I'm the head of this parish. I want you to know when I go to camp, I actually do miss you. I will miss you next Sunday, and I will miss you the Sunday following. And when I do liturgy up in South Carolina, I will be praying for the people here. I don't like not being here on Sundays. I feel like Sundays is the day that the priest should be with his family. But I'm under the authority of the church, and I'm grateful and I'm thankful that I have the opportunity to go to summer camp. I feel like I have a gift and a talent there, and I'm thankful that you are supporting that. I'm asking you, please, humbly, that you pray for me and for all the people that are up there. There are people up there already. Today is the first session of a 5-week period. There's 120 people up there running the first leg. We'll have over 20 people from our parish that are going to go there at some point in the summer. And then I ask also that you please be patient, as you were last year, to allow me to touch all the bases, to serve the church, and also to have some needed downtime with my family. I will try to keep things like the prayer team going, even while at camp or on vacation, and keep preparing for August, and we'll hit the ground running all together in August. But until then, please keep coming faithfully on Sundays. Please keep filling the church. Please pray for one another, and please pray for me. God bless you and keep you. Thank you for sharing a beautiful liturgy today. Amen.